Hey guys, it's Chris. From ancient Mayan murals in the kitchen to bones beneath a parking lot, here are 10 of the most incredible discoveries made during construction projects around the world. Number 10. Mayan basketball court. Many people don't know this, but the ancient Mayans were some of the first people in the world to play a form of basketball. All throughout the old Maya world, there have been lots of basketball courts found, particularly in the state of Yucatan, where there have been at least 26 pre-Columbian basketball courts discovered throughout the years. These are relics from before the fateful year of 1492, when Christopher Columbus landed in the New World and brought knowledge of the Americas to Europe. However, a recent discovery during construction near the West Technology University seems almost too ridiculous to be true. While in the process of clearing land for a new basketball court, builders actually stumbled upon an ancient Mayan ball court. This is kind of like digging up your carpet just to find an old ancient carpet underneath. So far as the story goes, the digging equipment ran into a hard layer of pinkish stone. The builders recognized its significance, and archaeologists were eventually called to the scene. Much to everyone's surprise, the archaeologists identified the site as an ancient ball court. So the university's gonna need to find a new place for their own court, as the ancient one that's being uncovered is going to be preserved properly for its historical value. Hopefully the new ball court will be used a little less aggressively than the ancient one. For those who don't know, the Mayan ball games were often extremely deadly and brutal, often involving ritual sacrifice. Imagine if you played a ball game against your friends and then the loser was put to death. That's kind of what it was like thousands of years ago. Sometimes. What about you? Would you play that kind of game? I mean, I like basketball, but I don't think I would stomach playing it for my life, although I'm guessing they didn't do it by choice either. Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 9. King Richard III. King Richard III died around 500 years ago. As King of England, you would expect for him to be in some church or special place to be honored for all time. So why were his bones discovered beneath a car parking lot in 2012, 500 years after he was killed in the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485? Supposedly, after the king was killed by his sworn enemy, his body was slung over a horse and then transported back to Leicester. But as the legend goes, he was put on display for 3 days to prove that he was dead before being slumped into a rather shoddy grave hole at the Church of the Grey Friars and buried and then ultimately forgotten. Sometime in the last 500 years, a blanket of tarmac was stretched over the king's grave and he was lost to time. And that sounds like a far cry from the ancient Egyptian burial services. But after centuries, the body of King Richard III has been found. It took more than 2 years for the bones to finally be legally identified as those of Richard III, and quickly after he was given a proper burial with a proper funeral service. The amount of people who turned out for the service in Leicester is actually fairly shocking, considering the king was already dead for 500 years. But many people, especially his descendants, have been trying to find him all this time. The famous actor Benedict Cumberbatch was even there to read a special poem dedicated to Richard III. According to CNN, Benedict Cumberbatch is actually a distant cousin of the last Plantagenet King of England. What would you do if you found ancient bones buried in your backyard? The whole project of identifying a body with DNA analysis is totally amazing, but it really boggles the mind. To learn more, there are several documentaries out there about the search for the missing king. Number 8. Viking mass grave. Here comes another interesting story from England. This happened at an old quarry pit in Dorset back in 2009, when a construction crew was trying to complete a relief road. In the middle of the construction, as the excavation team prepared the way for the road, they stumbled upon a gruesome mass grave of Viking skeletons. Each Viking had been decapitated, and their bodies piled in a shallow grave and their skulls piled to the side in a separate area. It was a massive sight, and until 2009, it had sat rather peacefully beneath the dirt on the side of a highway, completely unbeknownst to anyone. At the time, it was one of the most exciting and disturbing archaeological finds in Britain in recent history. After more analysis of the skeletons was completed, researchers agreed that it was a mass grave of executed Vikings. They used all kinds of fancy new digital and three-dimensional recordings to properly identify the positions that each individual had been in at the time of death. There were then forensic studies done as well to figure out what happened to these poor Vikings. According to the official estimates, there were somewhere between 47 and 52 individuals present. The Vikings were executed many centuries ago, probably because they lost a key battle in some long-forgotten war. Nowadays, some of these skeletons can be found at the British Museum in London, which seems to be a fitting memorial place. What do you think? If it gets people excited about history, I'm kind of all for it. Number 7. 43 dinosaur eggs. In China, construction workers recently uncovered an amazing discovery while in the middle of repairing a busy road. The construction crew had to halt their work when heavy machinery unearthed 43 fossilized dinosaur eggs. This happened in the Chinese city of Haiyuan, a city that already boasts a pretty impressive collection of dinosaur eggs. Who would have thought hiding beneath the surface of an ordinary road would be another massive clutch of dino eggs? 19 out of the 43 eggs were completely intact, with some of the biggest ones measuring as large as 5 inches in diameter. This is according to an article from CNN. Most of the eggs already in the city's collection belong to duck-billed dinosaurs that lived around 89 million years ago. Starting from the first discovery in 1996, 17,000 dinosaur eggs have been uncovered in this one city in the south of China. The whole city is kind of a dino nest. Researchers will need to do a bit of examining on these newest fossils to determine which species of dinosaur they belong to. It really makes you wonder how many more eggs are just hiding beneath the soil. There could theoretically be thousands of preserved eggs underneath the roads and buried beneath the basements of buildings. It sounds like a great place to move if you fancy yourself an amateur archaeologist. Number 6. Ship from 1773. In July of 2010, a pair of archaeologists began to dismantle the remains of a wooden ship that was found at the construction site of the World Trade Center in New York. This was at Ground Zero, deep in the ruins of the building. Nobody had known it was there even when the World Trade Center was first constructed. The boat had been underneath the ground in the middle of New York City for over 200 years. But finally, in 2014, archaeologists figured out the mystery and identified the boat. According to researchers, the boat was able to be traced back to colonial-era Philadelphia. They were able to determine that the white oak used to construct the ship's frame had to have been cut down in the year 1773, which was several years before the brutal war that actually established America as its own country independent from Britain. The process used to uncover this information is known as dendroprovenancing, in which scientists analyze tree rings from wood samples of the hull and then reference them against other historical tree chronologies. Basically, it's all in the wood. By using this process, researchers were able to discover that the same oak used to build the ship had also been used to build the Independence Hall in Philadelphia, in which the Declaration of Independence was signed back in 1776. The ship was originally designed by the Dutch to carry passengers and cargo across the river, but after being used for about 20 or 30 years, the ship sailed into lower Manhattan and sunk. It was ultimately buried and lost underneath the filling materials that had been used to extend Manhattan's shoreline. Number 5. The Charlotte Whale. This is a whale of a story. Back in 1849, while constructing the very first railroad between Rutland and Burlington in Vermont, workers unearthed the skeletal remains of a mysterious animal very close to the town of Charlotte. The bones had been buried about 10 feet under the surface and were preserved in a thick blue clay. At first, everyone was boggled by what an incredible skeleton was doing in Vermont. All the experts identified the bones as being some kind of whale, either a beluga whale or a white whale. Now, what was a giant whale, normally found in Arctic and subarctic marine waters, doing in the middle of Vermont? The explanation is simpler than you might think, because the town of Charlotte is very far inland, approximately 150 miles from the nearest ocean. There was no way that the whale could have freely been roaming the area. But this was no ordinary whale. It would have lived about 2,500 years ago, back when the whole area around Charlotte was underwater. After the glaciers began to retreat from North America 12,500 years ago, the Champlain Valley continued to remain slightly underwater for a few thousand years. It was somewhere in that time that the whale died and settled into the sediment at the bottom of the sea, which is now gone. Number 4. Mayan Murals. A family in Guatemala is in shock after uncovering ancient Mayan murals on their kitchen walls during a renovation for their home. Imagine ripping apart the cabinets in your home and finding ancient Native American hieroglyphs scrawled on the concrete foundation. It'd be absolutely amazing. This happened while the Guatemalan family were trying to paint their kitchen. They had begun to chip away at the plaster in their kitchen and soon uncovered the incredible artworks. This happened in the town of Chahul, according to National Geographic. Despite the age and the fact that they were covered up for so long, the murals are actually pretty impressive. You can see a mixture of traditional Maya and Spanish dress inside the murals, with what appears to be several figures holding human hearts inside of their hands. This is believed to represent something called the conquest dance. According to an archaeologist from the Boston University, the murals are depicting both the Spanish invasion and the conversion of the Maya to Christianity. So how could this amazing mural be inside a person's house and they not even know about it? It has a lot to do with how old people's homes are in Central America. This particular family home is at least 300 years old, constructed somewhere in the 17th century. But through the years, history gets buried. The murals were plastered over and lost to time. You have to also remember that many of these homes are built into rock foundations or repurposed from ancient domiciles and passed along over thousands of years. It's the same way that ancient skeletons and other artifacts are uncovered beneath the floors of houses in Europe or the UK because of how ancient the societies are. What about you? Do you live in a house with that long of a history? Let me know how old you think your house is in the comments below. Number 3. Underground city in Turkey. One of the largest underground cities in all of Turkey has recently been uncovered during a housing development project. Workers were in the middle of demolishing a few hundred buildings and preparing for the new construction when they happened upon a honeycomb of cave entrances, tunnels, and chambers carved by hand in the area surrounding a hilltop castle from the Byzantine era. Construction was immediately postponed, and it will likely not continue considering the historical significance of what they discovered. It's an entire underground city built in the fashion of a great labyrinth. According to History.com, the underground city is completely unknown. The earliest estimates are placing the age of some sections of the underground city at about 5,000 years old. To put that in perspective, it's about as old as the oldest Egyptian civilization. Several dozen artifacts have been removed from the chambers, and there have been many interesting discoveries inside the actual city, including places of worship. There is actually another site in the area, an underground city named Derinkiyu, which was once able to house around 20,000 people. But the newest site discovered is even larger. The entire area surrounding the Cappadocia region in Turkey is well known for boasting the world's most impressive collection of underground cities. This is because of serious volcanic activity from several million years ago. It created the perfect landscape to build an underground hive for human habitation. The hillsides of the region almost all contain apartments, temples, ventilation shafts, subterranean dwellings, and even tombs. Number 2. Secret palace rooms. This is kind of like finding a trapdoor or hidden dungeon in plain sight. Workers have uncovered 2 rooms inside Greenwich Palace while building a visitor center at the old Royal Navy College located in London, England. The workers were preparing the site for a brand new visiting center for the Painted Hall, which is like the English version of the Sistine Chapel. They were in the middle of preparing when they unearthed 2 rooms from the Palace of Placentia, later known as the Greenwich Palace. The palace was built in 1433 and is generally accepted as the birthplace of King Henry VIII and his daughters Elizabeth I and Mary I. This palace was considered the most luxurious out of all the palaces from the Tudor era. Experts believe that the 2 rooms recently uncovered were service quarters, housing stuff like the kitchens, the bakeries, and the washing facilities for laundry. There was even evidence found of bee bowls, which were the earliest version of commercial beehives. They basically kept beehives inside little holes in the walls so they could gather honey. The palace fell into ruin around the time of the English Civil War, and somewhere through the years, these 2 rooms were completely buried and lost. I wonder if there are more hidden rooms with more morbid or shocking stories behind them hidden nearby. It really wouldn't surprise me one bit. Number 1. Parking lot graves. What is it with people building parking lots over ancient grave sites? This story comes to us from Toronto, Canada. According to CBC News, archaeologists discovered the remains of at least 57 people buried underneath the parking lot of a Catholic church in Toronto. This happened at St. John the Evangelist Roman Catholic Church, as renovations were being done on the site. The elementary school adjacent to the church was needing to be rebuilt, and while everything was being prepared, the workers stumbled upon the graves underneath the old parking lot. The church was originally founded in the 1850s, and the coffins and grave markers found date back to around that time, with the earliest believed to have been from around 1866. As of the time of the story, construction had been halted until archaeologists could be 100% certain that there was no additional graves. This is not such an uncommon thing, as most churches had graveyards somewhere around them. Since there were no parking lots in the 1850s, it's not surprising that many people were buried and completely forgotten about over the years. This is probably not the only church that has a secret graveyard hidden underneath the asphalt of its parking lot. Which of these exciting discoveries interested you the most? Let me know in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. See you again soon for another great video.